Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Be Her Village podcast. My name is Caitlin LaGreas, and I'm the founder of Be Her Village. Be Her Village is an online gift registry for what moms really need: support, not stuff. We're talking to providers and people who care for moms in their pregnancy, their birth, their postpartum. We're talking to real moms and hearing their stories and really just getting into all the good stuff that comes along with new parenthood. So check us out, tune in, and let us know what you think.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Janelle, and this is Be Her Village. Be Her Village is a cash gift registry for new parents to get the funds they need to pay for the support they deserve, which could be anything from pelvic floor PT, doulas, lactation consultants, or even a sleep consultant like the one we're talking to today. Today, Caitlin is talking to Jayne Havens, the founder of Snooze Fest, and her approach to sleep is all about doing what feels best for family. She compares sleep training to potty training in that it is a skill for life, and that training our babies or teaching our babies to sleep is something that is going to benefit them in the long run. And I know there can be a lot of stigma around sleep training and whether or not that's the right thing for, the parents or the baby. But in this episode, Jayne really talks about how sleep training is a great tool to have if the way things are going aren't working for you and for your family. I'm linking all of Jayne's info in the show notes, and you can also find her on the Be Her Village registry. Enjoy the episode.
I am Jayne Havens, and I am a certified sleep consultant specializing in infant and toddler sleep.
Awesome. I'm so glad that you're here. Every time we have a conversation, I feel like I learn more, but I also just get more adamant that we need sleep coaches for every single parent.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, let's dive into it from the just natural beginning point of, I remember being a new mother and being horrified at the idea of a sleep trainer, at the idea of sleep coaching, at the idea of leaving my baby to cry without me. And that feeling that I had was supported by a whole community of people, parents and professionals, telling me that if I didn't, meet every single need of my baby immediately, that I was doing actual emotional and brain damage to them. So let's just throw that out there and break that down, because as an older parent now, I'm a little bit oh my goodness, I wish I had treated myself better. I wish that I had more respect for my own needs. It's something I'm still working through as a parent of slightly older children. But let's talk about it. Are we damaging our children when we're sleep training them?
Yeah, so studies show that we are not damaging our children. There's evidence to show that sleep-trained babies and toddlers are no better or worse off than babies that are not sleep-trained. So as a parent, you're fine either way. And I always tell parents this, it's a choice to parent your child however you choose to parent your child, and we are all doing the best that we can, we're all just making the decisions that we feel are best for ourselves and our family and our children, whether that's sleep training, whether that's not sleep training, whether that's breastfeeding, bottle feeding. There's so many different things that parents feel a lot of pressure, guilt, shame around, and at the end of the day, I know for certain that all the mothers, at least all the mothers that I come into contact with, all the parents that I come into contact with, are all just trying to do ultimately what's best for their own child, and they're making what they feel is the best decision for their family. So if you fall into that category where you feel that it's the best choice to sleep train your baby or your toddler, and I'd love to go into exactly what that means, then there's no shame in that. There's no damage in that. I would argue that a baby or toddler that is sleep trained is more well rested, more confident, and more comfortable with the idea of sleeping, which is a great thing. There's nothing bad about that. And let's just for a hot second talk about what sleep training is, because I think that people think that sleep training is cried out.
Yeah,
right?
it's leaving your baby, closing the door, and coming back in the morning. That's
yeah,
my vision of it, for sure.
Yeah, and that's one way of doing it. And frankly, if that's how a parent decided to do it, assuming the child was, old enough, not feeding in the middle of the night. I personally don't like to sleep train a hungry baby. I think that babies that are still hungry in the middle of the night should be fed, and then night weaning should be approached differently than just like cried out, right? That's just my personal opinion. There are pediatricians out there that will say to a parent of a 6, 7, 8, 9 month old baby. Actually, there are pediatricians out there that will say this to parents of 8 weeks olds, like just let them cry it out. I personally, that's not how I support my clients, but I do think that like you should trust whatever medical professional you've chosen for your child. So, you have to find the right medical provider for your family. And if they're giving you advice, you should to some degree trust it or go find another provider that you align with, right? Um, but sleep training is just teaching a baby or a toddler or an older child to fall asleep independently. So, for a baby that is nursing to sleep, you could start by just rocking that baby to sleep. And they're still not falling asleep independently, but they're falling asleep in a way that's a little bit more tricky for them than what they're used to, and that feels a little hard and frustrating. I always tell my clients who are taking that really gradual approach. I'm actually working with one of them now. We're moving from nursing to sleep to rocking to sleep to eventually sitting to sleep to putting the baby down in the crib. And it's going to be a really slow, gentle, responsive process. And it's going to take patience and a lot of TLC. But that's still sleep training, right? Sleep training is just teaching a baby or a toddler to fall asleep independently. So if a baby's nursing to sleep, then they stop nursing to sleep. If a baby is being rocked to sleep, then they aren't rocked to sleep anymore. For a toddler or a preschooler, a lot of 2, 3, 4-year-olds like to have a parent lie down with them while they fall asleep.
Mhm.
And, I would argue that if that's working for your family and then your child's sleeping through the night, then there's no problem. But a lot of the time, if you're lying with your 3-year-old while they fall asleep at bedtime, then they briefly rouse in the middle of the night and they're expecting you to be there and you're not. So then they want you to come back in the middle of the night, or they have anxiety about falling back asleep independently without you there. So sleep training a toddler is just weaning your way out of the bedroom at bedtime so that they can fall asleep without you being there. And then when they briefly rouse in the middle of the night, they're not so scared and they can just get themselves back to sleep.
Right. I mean, I think that's part of the thing to understand about infant and toddler, and honestly adult sleep too, is that we have natural sleep cycles. And so everybody naturally, even us, we're waking up throughout the night. But for children who are used to, there's nothing inherently wrong with falling asleep nursing or falling asleep rocking or falling asleep with a parent in the room. What's wrong, really, for the parents' sake, is that they then can't fall asleep again at 4 a.m. or 1 a.m. or 5
Yeah,
a.m. on their own because they don't have that skill set yet. Is that right?
exactly. And I would argue that it's not even wrong, it's just hard.
Mm.
So, if you as a parent are okay with your current situation around sleep, and sleep is hard, but you're okay with that and you've sort of made your peace with the fact that it's hard, then that's okay. I'd also argue that babies and toddlers want to be sleeping.
Mm.
So a lot of the time, I'm working with a family right now with a little, I think he's a 7-month-old baby who was waking up hourly to nurse back to sleep, not for food, just like to suck back to sleep. Um, and this was no longer sustainable for mom or baby. The baby was exhausted.
Mhm.
Like he was a total wreck. He was fussy and crying all the time. And he was crying every hour in the middle of the night because he wanted to be sleeping.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's why he was crying. So he wasn't crying because he needed mom. Like he was using mom to get back to sleep, but he was capable of falling asleep another way. He just needed to be given an opportunity to practice falling asleep in a new way. And this baby picked it up on the first night. Like he was good. He just wanted to sleep so badly. And mom actually felt a little bit silly because she was so worried about him feeling abandoned or traumatized. And
Well, that's
really,
what
he did way
we're told, though,
better.
Jane. We're told. I mean, I was like told that by moms in these groups, and I was told I
Yeah.
was injuring my child, and I take issue with that a little bit because what I'm hearing you say is that your sleep quote unquote training is more like sleep teaching. Like you are helping parents and children develop skills. develop skills, lifelong skills that are really, really important in an age appropriate way, in a family appropriate way. And I don't know, I think I have like a little chip on my shoulder a little bit about attachment parenting, and like, because I was so wrapped up in it. And I a little bit wish somebody had said what I'm saying now, which is just like, yeah, of course, meet your children's emotional needs. Of course, become attached. Of course, be a responsive parent. But at the same time, there has to be balance between meeting every immediate need and bending over backwards to adjust and adapt and respond to your child. And then the overall picture of like raising future adults and giving them skills that will last a lifetime, right? Like, I just feel like as parents, yes, it is great to be responsive in the middle of the night. And I was that parent. But at the same time, it's also, I have to teach you how to sleep at some point. And so I'm like a little bit in both, like I did the whole sleeping in a bed with my breastfeeding baby for a minimum of a year for all three of them. And then I also did, okay, it's time. Like,
it's time to move on.
I love you deeply, but you have to sleep on your own right now. And the shift that came, it was a hard, horrible night, but it was like one night. And we would talk to them. They were old enough to kind of understand what's happening, and they would cry and they would be upset. And then they would lay down and go to sleep for like 11 hours. And it was such a relief, because as soon as they learned the skill, like you said, they want to sleep. As soon as they learned the skill, they would just sleep through the night, every night, unless they were sick, unless they needed something. But we had established that there was a baseline of a skill. So if they weren't sleeping through the night, we knew something was up, and we would invite them back into our beds and we would meet their needs overnight. But there's a big difference, I think, between like having immediate needs versus just lacking the skill. And I think that's what you're talking about here.
Yeah, you actually raise a really good point. This is something that I talk about with families all the time. I really firmly believe that teaching your child to fall asleep and back to sleep independently. See, I could have just said sleep training your kid, but like teaching your baby to fall asleep and back to sleep independently really helps you as a parent to understand your child's communication in a way that you cannot understand if your child does not have that skill. So if you have a 6-month-old baby that has never learned to fall asleep and back to sleep independently, and they're up every single hour, where's your brain going to go? Your brain's going to go to, my baby's hungry, my baby's teething, my baby doesn't feel well, she has a tummy ache, whatever it may be. Your brain is going around in circles, and you have
And then you
anxiety and
get
you're worried.
Google and you like read all the worst things that it definitely is at 4 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if you teach your baby to sleep and then they sleep, then when they wake up, 3 months later out of the blue screaming bloody murder, you can dart right in there and know something's going on, because that's not typical, right? So a sleep trained baby is not ignored in the middle of the night. They don't stop calling out if they need something, if they're uncomfortable, if they're not feeling well. Sleep trained babies still cry in the middle of the night if they need something. They just have the confidence and the ability to put themselves asleep and back to sleep when they're feeling fine and they don't really need any help. So, I think that it's really, really a useful tool to help parents to better understand their baby so that you can be more responsive and actually meet their needs rather than just pacifying the noise. I think a lot of parents are just so uncomfortable with the crying that they very quickly will pop a pacifier in or quickly nurse, and they're just uncomfortable with the noise. So they are stopping the noise, but they're not listening to their child. They're not understanding their child's communication. And to me, that's actually not responsive, because you're not responding to their actual need. You're just sort of quieting them. And our children deserve to be heard. It's okay for them to have big emotions and for them to have big feelings about changes and learning new things, right? I mean, my kids both cried a crazy amount when I was trying to potty train them. They were not happy about that transition. There's no stigma around potty training. We do it with all of our kids, right? And I see this as very much the same thing. You can just do it at a time that works for you, I guess, is the main difference.
I love that comparison of like potty training versus sleep training, because they're both lifelong skills that we need to be functioning members of society. And you're right, one has a stigma and one doesn't, even though They can both be a gentle or not gentle. I mean, I think there's right and wrong ways to do both of them. And a lot of it depends on the family, and a lot of it depends on the kid. A lot of it depends on the age. That's a really great comparison. I love that.
Yeah, and it's the exact same. And to your point that like it can be gentle or not gentle, like I totally messed that up with my kids. I have total like PTSD from potty training my kids. It was really, really hard. And at the end of the day, like he figured it out and we got there. But it was hard and it was stressful. And
Mhm.
I wish I had had some support. And it's funny, there are potty training consultants now. So like I'm all for that.
I am a big fan of like just having consultants for everything, because
Yeah.
I don't think we're supposed to do this alone. That's just like my foundational belief about motherhood. And I think that when we used to live in an actual village, we had people that were a few steps up, ahead of us and a few steps behind us. We had mothers and aunties and grandmothers, and we don't have that right now. So we have to tap into that wisdom in a different way. And that wisdom right now looks like hiring coaches, hiring consultants. I mean, as a doula, that's really what I'm doing. I'm helping people through pregnancy and birth. There's postpartum doulas. Why shouldn't there be sleep doulas and breastfeeding doulas, lactation consultants and potty training and all the things? I think that we need more rather than less. I
Totally.
would like to ask you, and I don't know if you can answer this, but I'm curious. I was thinking about recording this with you, and I was thinking, when you're working with families, are you noticing the people who are reaching out to you that the burden of overnight parenting, meaning like going in and handling a child who's waking up or sleeping with them, that sort of thing, is falling more on mothers and women than fathers and partners?
Absolutely.
Mm. That's what
Absolutely.
I suspected, but I wanted to sort of see.
I wish I could say that that wasn't true, but it is. Every now and then, not every now and then, a fair amount, I work with parents where like both parents will be in communication with me. Whether that's a mom and a dad or two dads or two moms, have, two parents on our text message thread. And it's really sort of like an equal partnership and both parents are really, really involved in the process. But I would say that it's far more common to have mom take responsibility for the planning, like the emotional labor of this process, right? Like a lot of times dads will be there to be supportive. They'll say like whatever you want, like I'll help you handle this. Like however you want to go about it is fine, but like just tell me what to do, right? So then that puts it on mom to figure out what to do, which is sometimes the hardest part, the actual implementation of the plan or these strategies isn't the hard part. The hard part is figuring out the best fit for your family and the right way to go about it. And when that gets dumped on mom, that's a lot of pressure and it's emotional labor, right?
It's that,
That's what we take
it's that
on.
invisible workload. And I mean, I'm like knee deep in that in my own relationship. And I'm saying that with like my husband helps and does so much. And I think he almost like does so much around the house because he doesn't do that emotional planning and thinking and what's the next thing and where are they going. And we had this like little disagreement yesterday about like something he signed up for at work that extended his day by like 15 minutes, but it completely threw a wrench in my entire plans for the summer. And I'm like, you don't have to get childcare to work. Like there's just this whole emotional and invisible workload that mothers take on. And I suspect, and you're confirming that extends into that nighttime. I remember I was always the one that was responsible, mostly because I was breastfeeding. So I was like the one that had the thing the baby needed. But even beyond that, they cry out for mothers. Mothers are the ones that do a lot of this work while also then waking up and going to our full-time jobs, or waking up and staying home with the children and keeping a house and keeping our family running. And it's incredibly unbalanced. In my totally non-professional, non-evidence-based opinion, it feels extraordinarily unbalanced, this labor of caring for the children overnight. And I point that out because it becomes an issue for women and mothers that if we're not getting the support in teaching our children how to sleep, then we are suffering for it. You said in the beginning of the podcast that babies are not, there's evidence that says babies are not harmed or benefiting either way from being sleep trained or not. And I wonder, like, the next study of, well, how about the moms? Like, how are the moms that are sleep training? I don't know if there are studies done on that, but I wonder how it feels for parents who are actually getting solid sleep for themselves overnight. Because that's really, like, besides all the benefits of the babies and the children and the learning, there's also this factor of, like, everything feels better when you have sleep. Mental health issues, workloads, like, it just, everything feels better for moms. And I think
Yeah, there's that saying like you can't pour from an empty cup, right? And or put your oxygen mask on first. Those are little cliches that have a whole lot of meaning behind them, right? And they are very, very real. And when parents are hollow inside and empty and not happy, not rested, not looking forward to the day ahead, like how can they best support their little tiny children that need them so much, right? How can you be responsive during the day if you how can you meet all of those needs of your tiny little human during the day if you have nothing left to give? You can't.
I really
So
felt like it was
I
when I did finally quote unquote sleep train, which literally for me was like letting him cry for 20 minutes and he slept for 11 hours. So I finally,
honestly, that's usually what it looks like. Like these stories of babies crying all night long is really like when that happens, something is not set up right. Either, the child wasn't ready to be weaned and you're ditching all the night feeds, or, a baby that still has a very strong moro reflex that's not swaddled because parents want to rip the band-aid off or whatever. Certain babies need a certain level of support to be set up for success. When you set a child up for success with sleep training, this is not a 12-hour cry fest. It's just not.
no, it was so little. He was 11 months old. I believe he was already weaned overnight. And it just became, if I don't get sleep, I can't be the mom I want to be in the daytime. It's exactly what you said. And I remember very specifically, this like crunchy moms group, that might even be the name of the group. And, and they shamed me like hardcore, not even subtle. We're just like, you're not meeting your baby's needs. You're not doing a good job if you're night weaning your 11-month-old. Like I was getting shamed for night weaning, not even for sleep training. I didn't dare bring that up. It was just unbelievable to me. And I wrote to them, well, it's for my mental health. It's so I can be a good mom during the day. And it was like, no, you're a terrible mother, and we disagree with you. And I just think
Yeah.
there's got to be at all points in this parenthood, both pregnancy and beyond, there's got to be looking at the mother and the parents' needs alongside the babies. Because if cool, you're meeting your baby's needs every hour overnight, but now you're exhausted and you're not the mom you want to be.
But
How is that helping the baby?
but are you meeting your baby's needs every hour? Because your baby needs to sleep and you're not teaching your baby, and your baby wants to be sleeping and you're not giving your baby the opportunity to practice, to learn, to try. So, I think the whole meeting a baby's needs thing is more complicated.
Right. It's like,
I,
which needs, right? Is it the need to have the pacifier put back in, or is it the need to learn how to sleep alone? Which actually, I just want to like hammer that home a little bit more. That was the thing that changed my entire mindset. And it's a mindset shift. I was elbow deep in attachment parenting and all that. And I'm totally supportive of the principles of that. I just think sometimes the execution, it leaves parents struggling and filled with guilt if we're not doing these really specific things. And I read the book Bringing Up Bebe by Pamela
Mhm.
Druckerman, who's an American mom who moved to Paris and had her babies there. And she talks a lot about sleep and about la pause, which is basically like when you hear your baby cry, just let them talk a little. They're crying as they're communicating, and just give them a minute. And there's this whole approach that didn't necessarily work for me, but in that book, she talks about teaching them the skills. And I am a teacher by trade. That's what I did before I got into all of the birth work and the doula work. And it just switched it for me. It was like, oh, this is a life skill that I need to teach him. And I'm doing him a disservice by not, and doing myself a disservice as well. And everything sort of aligned there. And I love talking to you about this stuff because I think it's a really, really important message. I would like to switch gears a little bit because you said something earlier about this like cascade. It reminded me actually of my special ed days of task analysis. So we used to take a big task like sleeping and we'd break it down into like rocking and then laying down and then closing your eyes and that sort of thing. So I would love for you to walk us through a little bit, like, what are the skills? How are you building upon them? Is it just crying it out? What does it look like to actually work with a sleep coach?
Sure. So as far as like breaking down the skills and taking it step by step, I honestly think it's a combination of like sometimes it depends on the child. Like some children really do benefit from like the slow progression of taking it one step at a time. For some children, that's really, really comforting and it makes the process really, really seamless. It just takes longer, but that's fine. Parents are willing to be patient and it works for baby, and that's great. Other children are really crying, saying, like, I need you to get out of my way. you know and the entire process of taking it baby step by baby step is really frankly pretty excruciating for a child that's really just crying out and saying, can you please just give me some space? So it really depends on both the child's temperament and the parent's anxiety around the process, because for a parent that's really, really anxious about just acknowledging that maybe their child would do this easier without their help. I've worked with parents who are spending an hour and a half bouncing on a bouncy ball to get their baby to sleep, and they think like, my child hates sleep. We bounce for an hour and a half, he won't go to sleep, his eyes get droopy. The second we stop bouncing, he pops awake again. And then we just try to put that baby down and just like give him 10 or 15 minutes, and 9 times out of 10, like they're asleep without it.
Wow.
So I think it really just depends on both like the child's temperament and the
How do you
parents.
figure
And
that out?
so it's a little bit of guesswork. I've been doing this long enough at this point where like within the first couple of days, I can see if something's just not working, right? And then we quickly pivot. I support families for a 2-week process. It's a 2-week process typically. With older children, I work with families in 2-week increments, because when you're dealing with, an 18-month-old that's climbing out of their crib and doesn't have the impulse control to stay in a bed, like that's a longer process, right? But for an infant, or a young toddler that's still in a crib, usually sleep can be worked out within 2 weeks. If we land on, typically the first approach is whatever feels best for parents, right? They get to decide. Their baby is not a part of this conversation. So I will lay out 2 or 3 different options for how to go about teaching the baby to fall asleep independently. Parents will land on something that feels like the right fit. We'll take a couple days at it. And if something's feeling off, then we'll regroup, figure out what's going on, and pivot if necessary, or stay the course if parents are really committed to sticking with the plan. I describe my own approach as being very client led. So my goals are my clients' goals. I am not coming in to steamroll families into making changes that they don't want to make. I'm there to act as the expert on the topic. So I provide them with a solid amount of information, and I help them to sort of wade through all of the information that's out there, because there's so much. So I really give parents a really concise plan that outlines the options literally in like a page and a half or 2 pages worth of information. Parents are too tired to read anything more than that. And then I provide them a whole lot of support through the process, because, just like I love to equate this to like getting in shape, right? Like going to the gym, nobody likes that. Like that's hard. We're tired. We don't feel like it. If you have to meet a trainer there every single day, then you're going to show up, right?
Right.
And I'm the trainer. So I send my clients a text message every morning. How did the night go? And if they weren't getting that text message in the morning, who knows what would happen, but they know that we're going to talk about it the next day. And that helps them to be motivated to implement something,
Right.
right? To just move the needle in the right direction a little bit every single day. I always tell people, like, we don't need to bang this out in 3 days. This doesn't need to be a a one and done. This can be a gradual process. You just have to be willing to move the needle in the right direction a tiny bit, baby steps every single day.
I'm just sitting here listening and thinking of myself when I was in this like every 2 hours wake up, and I feel like if somebody told me all I have to do is hire you and 2 weeks later I would be reaching my sleep goals, I would pay any amount of money I could afford to get that service. I mean, it's such a beautiful life altering thing to get sleep. Because I think we're both sitting here as two well rested people with children who are sleeping. I mean, I still couldn't get my act together. I'm still running around delaying our podcast and trying to get kids ready for camp. That's already, even with a full night of sleep, life still feels impossible. But without sleep, it feels so, so desperate. And it feels when you're in it like you're just never ever going to get out of it. It feels like they're always going to be this way. So I just think it's such a beautiful thing that you offer, and I'm excited for people to know about it and to break down some of that stigma, to tell our sleep stories and to tell our successes about it. I am wondering this one thing, and I only because this would be like my concern in hiring you or a sleep consultant is like to be the one family it doesn't work on. You know, like this feeling of like, oh God, my kid is definitely broken. I'm broken. Nobody can help us. Have you run into families that your approach doesn't work with or more difficult clients? And what do you do in that sort of situation? Are there people who are just unreachable?
So, 9 times out of 10, when sleep training is not effective, it's really because parents aren't committed to the plan. And in my experience, it doesn't happen so often because I am willing to work with them in a way that works for them, right? So, I think that eliminating the options that don't align with the family's parenting style is sort of the key to that. Because, if I get hired by a family and I tell them, all right, time to cry it out, and that's not going to feel comfortable for them, then they're not going to do it. And then they're not going to be successful. And then I'm not successful. So I think the key to success is really the client led approach, meeting families where they are. That being said, I think some families just aren't ready. Um, they're just not, and that's okay. I don't. I'm not like the bed sharing police. If you have your kids in your bed and that's working for you, like I'm not coming after you. It's not my mission to get babies out of parents' beds, right? It's my mission to help people make changes, meaningful changes in their own home that are necessary for them. So, I was hired by a family recently that was bed sharing and nursing all night long. And I proposed a really, really gradual, gentle approach, like what I described, like just starting with rocking to sleep instead of nursing to sleep. Um, and even still nursing in the middle of the night, just not nursing to sleep and then rocking to sleep afterwards. And we got on a phone call and I thought, all right, we're going to get started. And then I never heard from mom. And I checked in and was like, hey, are you ready to get started? And I never heard from her. And it was like radio silence. And she just wasn't ready. So, that happens. And so that's not that like it wasn't possible. It's just that she wasn't ready. And that's okay. When she is ready, I will be here with open arms, happy to help her. A lot of the time, when I notice that my clients are really struggling to implement whatever it is that we've decided to implement, I will suggest that we just take a pause. So if we're working together for 14 days and by day 3 I feel like they're not following anything that we've talked about, then I'll say, you know what, let's take a break. Let's pause our time. I want you to get your money's worth with me. I want you to be successful when you're ready to work on this. So let's pause and come back to me when you're ready to work on it. And that's usually how I handle it. And they feel, I think, relieved because they don't want to feel pressured to do something that they don't want to do. And I don't want to pressure them to do something that they don't want to do. So I think they feel relieved to have sort of an out. And that's okay. And when they're ready, I'm happy to help them.
It's so interesting because when I ask that question, I'm thinking about like the child not responding to the techniques. And the answer is really the techniques work. The children are the one thing that comes to mind is like children are just so incredibly resilient and flexible in ways that we can't even begin to be or understand. So what it really comes down to is our own readiness. And I would imagine that that doesn't happen all that often, only because the people who are reaching out to a sleep consultant have goals they want to meet, have things that are not working for them in their families. So
Yeah, you're right. Although I will say that some people do sometimes think like, oh, if I just pay this sleep consultant all this money, I'll be able to sleep again. Like they almost think they can just like buy their way out of it. And it doesn't work that way. I'm there to just actually support them and give them a plan, but they have to do the work. So sometimes I think people think that they can just like throw money at the problem and that doesn't work,
that that
obviously.
resonates with me harder than I want it to in my doula work, because there's people that
Yeah.
hire me or have hired me in the past as a doula, and then when I say, okay, well, here's like X, Y, and Z that you need to do in order to dig into your relationship with your provider and in order to, create the birth support team that you want, and like it's not just you hire me and then you magically get the perfect birth. It's that you have to actually take steps, and I'll tell you what the steps are, and then it can really, you can feel people just disengage, and it's like, oof.
Yeah, like they thought that they were hiring you for you to do all that work for
Yeah.
them, but they need to do the work because that they need to make the right decisions and the right choices for their birth. Right.
And
I get
it's
that.
not a decision I can make for them, same as you. It's like I don't know, your memories and your understanding of your body and your baby and your all the emotional things that we bring into something. It's really hard to do the work. It's hard to do the work with sleeping. It's hard to do the work with birthing and preparing for birth. And it's all hard, really. That's it's not like the positive message I want to end on, but it's the truth that this is all really, really hard. And hiring somebody won't make it less hard. It will make it less hard, but you still have to do the work. You still have to like put your head down and do the work. So very, very
Exactly.
interesting, Jayne. I love it. And I just love the comparison of potty training and sleep training. And I feel like that we should expand on that. That is just wild to me. I've never thought of it like that before. And I think that's
Yeah, I try to make that analogy for people all the time. I don't know, there's like such a stigma around sleep training and there's so much anxiety around it. And the other thing I always tell parents is that sleep training is really oftentimes the first time that you as a parent ever say no to your child,
mm,
right? So if your child wants to nurse to sleep, if your baby wants to nurse to sleep and you just decide we're going to rock to sleep instead. Like you were just nursed, you're full, you're good. You're going to be rocked to sleep instead and your baby's crying, they're saying, I want to nurse, and you're saying, I love you, but no,
right.
right? It's the first time that you've ever said no. And I talk to my clients about this all the time. I have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. I say no to my kids 10,000 times a day. It gets easier as your children get older, right? It's really hard to say no to a baby. We don't want to tell them no. But setting these boundaries and setting these sort of like loving limits are a really great way to build the foundation for your child being super resilient and being okay with the word no and being young and hearing that is okay. It doesn't mean that you don't love them. It doesn't mean that you're not responding to them. It just means that you're not giving them exactly what they want in the moment that they want it, right? And
Absolutely. And I actually wonder, my other question about like your clientele, I wonder what the ratio is of like first children versus subsequent children. Because I only asked this, it came up when I was with my friends the other day. With my first, it was like the house had to be silent and he had to be in this position and just for napping and for sleep generally. And then I had a second and third baby, and the second and third baby, not, they weren't twins, second and then the third baby, I can't wake them up. Like if they fall asleep in the car, I can still, she's 5 years old. If she falls asleep in the car, I can transfer her to the couch and we can have conversations and everything's going. The dog is barking, the phone is ringing. It doesn't matter. You can't wake her up because she was just taken along for the ride, right? Like as a baby,
yes.
she learned how to nap when she needed to nap. There was very little attention paid to her sleep. I kind of feel bad about it, but I also feel like it made her much more flexible, much more resilient, and have better sleep habits because we didn't go through those things with her. Do you see that in your own practice? Are you seeing that you're working more with first
Yeah.
parents or?
So I wish I had data on it. I don't, so I can't really tell you for sure. But what I do notice is that I work with a lot of second time parents that have a hard time accepting that their second child may not get those 3 naps a day in a dark room with a sound machine with a quiet house the way their first child did. So, a lot of the parents that I work with are very sort of like organized, type A, get stuff under control very, very quickly. And they had success with their first child, whether they hired me or did it on their own or whatever it may be. They got sleep under control very quickly. And then with their second child, they're having a harder time. Their child is probably to some degree fine, but they're having a hard time letting go of some of the order and control that you're able to have with your first child that you can't quite implement with the same level of consistency that you can with your second, because your second is being carted around. And I think it's more just that parents have a hard time coming to terms with that, or at least the parents that I work with have a hard time coming to terms with that. And, part of them is like, well, I can't be locked up in my house. But then part of them is like, I can't let them nap in their stroller, and they don't know what to do. And so I help them to manage, frankly, just like their emotions around all of it and their
It's the guilt
expectations.
that you have to manage, and that I think so many parents of that have two or more, it's this guilt of I can't meet everybody's needs exactly perfectly. And I'm such a big believer in like I wish that we could all start on our second baby, because I see so many people like in my own personal life where the first baby is like more anxious and more high needs. And I think part of that, not all of that, but part of that is that that child got every single need met because they were the only thing that was there to care
Yeah.
for. And then by the time the second and third come along, they just kind of get themselves into the whatever routine works for the entire family, but their needs were never the only ones. Really, really,
Exactly.
really interesting. Thank you so much for coming on today, Jayne. Just one last thing before we hop off. I wanted to talk about your sleep trainer training, actually, because you're
Yeah.
not just a sleep consultant yourself, but you actually have a company and you train sleep consultants. Can you briefly talk about that and also share your offer for the Be Her Village community?
Sure. So, in addition to supporting families one on one, I also train, mentor, and certify others to become certified sleep consultants. I actually have a really large population of birth and postpartum doulas enrolled in my program. I think that this career, this field is really complementary to the work that doulas are doing, because doulas are already supporting families in those earliest of days postpartum. So, for a postpartum doula, if you're supporting a family for 2 or 3 months in home, and then that's right when sleep is like in a good place, and then a few months later, it sort of tends to get tricky again. So for a doula to be able to then support that family one more time, I think is really, or even several more times, is advantageous. So I offer an online certification course. It's self-guided and self-paced. There is support from me personally. I'm very active within the community of my students and grads in a Facebook group with everybody together. And I teach a very well rounded, comprehensive curriculum. As you heard me talk about today, I don't teach like one sleep training technique. I teach really, really gentle, gradual, hands on methods all the way through extinction and everything in between. In addition to teaching all of the sleep stuff, I place a really heavy emphasis on entrepreneurship and business building. This is why I created the course. I noticed that others out there were not teaching their students how to be business people. And when you go into business as a sleep consultant, you need to know how to find clients, how to land clients, how to support them properly, how to market yourself. You need sales experience, you need business strategy, and you need the mindset to turn your little idea into something that generates an income. Because at the end of the day, like when you start a business, I know as a doula, I'm sure you probably identify with this. Like we are in our work to help people. Like we actually, we feel like we're there to serve and we're there to support people. And that feels like something that shouldn't come along with a price tag. But at the end of the day, we're also in business. And if we want to be able to serve people and do it all day or all night
And
or whatever
without
you
and
do.
without burnout and resentment. That's really where the key
Exactly.
comes in.
So
It is an energy exchange And it's the only way actually to keep yourself in this for the long term is to ask for a fee that keeps you happy and balanced.
Exactly. So, I place a heavy emphasis on teaching that so that my students learn to feel good about the fact that they are building really thriving and successful businesses. And I do have a discount code that I'm going to offer your audience today. What did I say it was going to be? Be Her
Your
Village
Village
200
200. That's right. For $200.
for $200 off the price of the course. I do offer payment plans, and this code will be valid if you enroll on a payment plan or if you pay full price.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jayne. I hope that the parents who are listening will reach out, and I hope the professionals who are listening will think about adding sleep consultations to their, bag of tricks, because it is really something that I think every single family needs in some form or another, unless they have little unicorn babies. But I haven't actually met anybody with a unicorn baby yet, and I certainly
Agreed.
have them. Thank you so much for having this conversation today, Jayne. I always appreciate being able to get in a room with you and share all of the wisdom and great work that you're doing.
Same. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Thanks again for tuning in to the Be Her Village podcast. I caught up with Jayne a couple of days ago to see if she had any updates or anything to let our audience know. And I'm excited to say that she has started a podcast and it's coming out at the end of this month. It's called the Becoming a Sleep Consultant podcast. And on her podcast, she's going to be talking about the business aspect of what it's like to be a sleep consultant. It's going to be an insider's view on launching, growing, and scaling a sleep consulting business. So if that sounds like something you are interested in learning about or something that you're eagerly trying to pursue now, this is going to be the podcast for you. So you're going to be able to find that wherever you find your podcast at the end of the month, and we'll keep you updated. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day.